Every single day, people walk through life being judged before they even open their mouths. It's the quiet truth that lives beneath the surface of society, the quick glances, the silent whispers, the unspoken decisions made in split seconds. When someone walks into a room, others form an entire story about them just by the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the tone of their voice. They think they know who that person is, what they do, what they're worth. And most of the time, those assumptions have nothing to do with reality. The danger of assumptions lies in how natural they feel. People don't stop to think that they're doing it. They assume it's just instinct or intuition. But what they call instinct is often conditioning, the layers of bias, history, and learned behavior passed down from generation to generation. Society teaches people to see others through lenses that distort the truth. Those lenses are built from media portrayals, old stereotypes, and narrow experiences. So when someone sees a black man walking confidently through a lobby or sitting in a first-class seat, some minds immediately start searching for explanations that fit their bias instead of reality. They don't see a leader, an executive, or a scholar, they see a stereotype. They don't see confidence, they see arrogance. They don't see calm, they see threat. This is how assumptions quietly destroy fairness before anyone even has a chance to prove who they are. It happens in offices, in stores, on the streets, and even in the smallest everyday interactions. It's a poison that spreads not through hatred alone, but through the comfort of ignorance. The man in this story understood that feeling all too well. He had worked his whole life to earn respect, to reach a position that few achieve. But still, when people looked at him, they didn't see accomplishment, they saw color. They didn't see success, they saw difference. And in those few seconds, before a single word was spoken, they made a decision about him. That decision guided how they treated him, how they looked at him, and even how they spoke to him. It's the invisible wall that so many have to climb every single day just to be treated as equals. Assumptions are dangerous not because they are always loud or violent, but because they are silent and constant. They show up in the small things, a hesitant smile, a delayed response, a questioning tone. They live in the moments when someone clutches their bag a little tighter or double-checks a receipt. They live in the lowered expectations and the raised eyebrows. And the worst part is that many who hold these assumptions don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're being fair, polite, professional. But fairness isn't about politeness, it's about perception. When people assume who someone is, they rob them of the chance to define themselves. They take away the freedom to be seen honestly. That's what makes these assumptions so damaging. They don't just limit how others see you, they start to shape how you see yourself. If someone spends their entire life fighting to be recognized for their talent instead of their skin color, eventually that fight becomes exhausting. It wears on the spirit. It forces you to prove what others are given the benefit of the doubt for. Imagine living in a world where you can't simply be, you have to convince. Convince people that you belong. Convince people that you're capable. Convince people that you're safe. That's the weight of assumptions. And yet, so many carry it with grace and strength, never letting it break them, even when it should. Because deep down, they know who they are, even when the world refuses to see it. But when that man pulled out his ID, something shifted. That small, simple motion shattered every quiet assumption in the room. It exposed how wrong people were, not through anger, not through shouting, but through truth. It reminded everyone that the surface never tells the whole story. Because the danger of assumptions isn't just that they're wrong, it's that they make people comfortable with being wrong. They allow injustice to hide behind smiles and silence. They make people believe they can judge others without consequence, as if their opinion carries the weight of truth. Assumptions blind us to potential, to humanity, to shared experience. They shrink the world into boxes and categories that make people feel safe but keep them ignorant. They turn individuals into symbols instead of seeing them as people. And every time someone makes an assumption based on race, they contribute to a chain reaction, one that affects hiring decisions, social interactions, and even life or death encounters. It's not just a thought, it's an action. It has real impact, real consequences, real pain. The danger isn't just in how people see others, but in how easily they justify those views. They convince themselves it's not racism, it's reason. Not bias, just observation. But that's how it spreads, quietly, comfortably, until it feels normal. And by the time the truth comes out, it's already done its damage. Identity is one of the most powerful things a person can carry. It's not just a name on a card or a photo on an ID, it's the story of who you are, what you've done, and what you stand for. But too often, the world tries to strip that away. Instead of seeing the individual, people see a label. Instead of recognizing a person's journey, they reduce them to their appearance. The power of identity lies in the fact that it cannot be taken or denied. It's the truth that exists beneath all the noise, and when it's revealed, it commands respect even from those who doubted it. When that man reached for his ID, it wasn't just a piece of plastic he was holding, it was proof of everything he had fought for. It represented years of hard work, late nights, sacrifices, and moments when he could have given up but didn't. Every letter printed on that card carried the weight of his achievements, his education, his title, and his perseverance. In that instant, the same people who looked at him with doubt and judgment were forced to confront the truth. Their assumptions had no power over his identity. Identity is the quiet strength that moves beneath the surface. It doesn't need to shout to be real. It doesn't need validation from others to exist. But when people choose to see only what they want to see, they underestimate the power behind it. They think that by labeling someone, they can define them. They think that by ignoring a person's worth, they can reduce it. But identity doesn't bend to ignorance, it reveals it. It's the one thing that can silence a room without a single word spoken. The world often underestimates the power of authenticity. When you truly know who you are, no one's opinion can shake you. The man in that story didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't try to defend himself. He simply showed his truth. And that truth carried more weight than any insult or bias ever could. Because real power doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from confidence. It comes from the certainty of knowing your own value even when others refuse to see it. Identity also holds the history of struggle. For many, it's not just about personal success, it's about representing generations who were silenced, overlooked, and underestimated. It's about being the living proof that progress is possible, that dignity can rise from discrimination. When he revealed who he was, he didn't just speak for himself. He spoke for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly, for everyone who's ever had to prove their worth just to be treated with basic respect. That's the true power of identity. It carries more than a name, it carries a legacy. But what makes identity powerful is also what makes it threatening to those who build their comfort on stereotypes. When someone shatters those expectations, it forces people to confront their bias. It makes them uncomfortable, because it exposes the truth they'd rather ignore, that their assumptions were never grounded in fact. The moment that ID came out, the illusion of superiority crumbled. Suddenly, the man they dismissed was someone of authority, someone of accomplishment, someone who belonged in that very space, perhaps even more than they did. The power of identity lies in how it changes perspective. It challenges perception. It reminds people that status, success, and strength aren't confined to any one color, culture, or background. It breaks the walls that prejudice builds. And in that moment, when the truth is revealed, the entire dynamic shifts. The same people who were once dismissive suddenly become respectful. The same voices that questioned now fall silent. It's not magic, it's the force of truth meeting ignorance head-on. But there's another layer to it too. The man didn't need that ID to know who he was. He already carried his identity within him, in the way he stood, the way he spoke, the calm in his eyes. The ID wasn't for him. It was for them. It was a mirror held up to their prejudice, a reflection of how wrong they had been. Because sometimes, the proof of who you are doesn't need to change you, it needs to change them. That's what makes identity such a powerful weapon against discrimination. Identity gives people power, not because it demands attention, but because it holds truth. And truth is the one thing prejudice can't stand against. It's solid, undeniable, and unshakable. When you know who you are, you don't have to explain yourself to those who misunderstand you. You don't have to fight for every inch of respect. You simply exist in your truth, and that alone becomes your defense. That's what the man in this story showed, the quiet but unstoppable strength of someone who refuses to let others define him. Every achievement he carried, every barrier he broke, every title he earned became part of that identity. It was the armor he wore into a world that constantly tried to underestimate him. And while others saw only the surface, he knew the story that lay beneath. That's the essence of real power, not in proving others wrong, but in staying true to who you are, even when the world refuses to see it. Respect is something everyone deserves, but not everyone receives. Too often, respect is distributed like a privilege instead of a right, measured by appearance, status, or color instead of humanity. When people looked at that man, they didn't see someone worthy of respect, they saw someone they believed was beneath it. Their vision was clouded by bias, their understanding limited by stereotype. But true respect isn't about who looks powerful or who fits a certain image, it's about recognizing the dignity that exists within every person, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what they do. The problem is that respect in today's world often comes with conditions. People say they respect others, but that respect is fragile, easily broken when someone doesn't fit their expectations. They respect authority when it looks familiar. They respect success when it wears the right suit or speaks the right way. But when someone doesn't fit that mold, their respect suddenly vanishes. This is the core of what happened that day. The man was treated as less, not because of anything he said or did, but simply because of the color of his skin. Before he could even speak, the verdict had already been given. And that's the tragedy of conditional respect, it's not respect at all, it's arrogance disguised as civility. True respect requires humility. It means acknowledging that you don't know everything about someone just by looking at them. It means giving people the space to define themselves instead of defining them based on your comfort zone. When you look at someone and decide they don't deserve to be treated with kindness or dignity because they don't look like you or dress like you reveal more about your own ignorance than their worth. Respect is not something to be earned after judgment, it should be the foundation upon which all human interaction is built. The man in this story didn't demand respect through confrontation, he simply existed with quiet confidence. That calmness made his truth even more powerful. When the moment came and his identity was revealed, it didn't just expose their mistake, it exposed their lack of respect. It showed how shallow their perception was, how easily they allowed prejudice to blind them. Respect beyond appearance means seeing the person first and everything else second. It means looking beyond what's visible to understand what's valuable. What makes respect so meaningful is that it has to come from genuine understanding. It can't be forced or faked. You can tell when someone respects you out of fear versus when they respect you out of humanity. The people in that room shifted their tone instantly after seeing his ID. The same ones who dismissed him were suddenly polite, careful, even apologetic. But that's not respect, that's reaction. Real respect doesn't change based on titles or status. It stays consistent whether someone is a CEO, a janitor, or a stranger walking down the street. It doesn't rise and fall with power, it flows from character. There's something deeply revealing about how people treat others when they think no one is watching or when they believe the person they're judging has no influence. That's when their true values show. The way those individuals treated that man before knowing who he was reflected what they truly believed, that respect was a privilege to be given, not a right to be recognized. But the moment they realized their mistake, their tone changed, and suddenly they wanted to make things right. That's the kind of hypocrisy that still lingers in so many corners of the world today. Respect beyond appearance means living with the understanding that every person you meet has a story, a struggle, and a purpose. You never truly know who you're standing next to. It could be someone who has built an empire, someone who has overcome unimaginable hardship, or someone whose kindness has changed lives. Judging people before knowing them doesn't just diminish them, it diminishes you. It limits your capacity to connect, to learn, and to grow. When people base their respect on stereotypes, they create walls between themselves and others. Those walls are built from fear and ignorance, and they separate humanity into categories that should never exist. The man's experience was just one example of how fragile those walls really are. All it took was one ID, one moment of truth, for everything to crumble. But it shouldn't take that much to treat someone with dignity. It shouldn't take proof of success for someone to deserve respect. Respect beyond appearance is one of the purest forms of moral strength. It means being able to look at someone who doesn't look like you and still recognize their value. It means giving them the same courtesy you'd want for yourself. It's not about agreeing with everyone or liking everyone, it's about acknowledging that every person has the same right to be treated as human. That's why respect is more powerful than authority, more meaningful than status, and more revealing than words. Anyone can claim to be respectful when it's easy, but the real test comes when the situation challenges your bias. When you can look at someone and see their worth before the world tells you who they are, that's when you've truly learned what respect means. There is a kind of strength that doesn't make noise, that doesn't demand attention, and yet it speaks louder than any voice in the room. It's the strength that shows up in the way a person stands tall when others try to look down on them. It's in the calmness that stays steady while others lose control. Silent strength is not about aggression or dominance, it's about restraint, composure, and knowing that your worth does not depend on anyone else's recognition. When truth lives inside you, you don't have to shout it for the world to hear. You just have to live it, and eventually, it echoes louder than words ever could. When that man stood there, facing judgmental eyes and quiet disrespect, he didn't argue or raise his voice. He didn't try to convince anyone of his importance. He didn't let anger dictate his reaction. Instead, he remained calm, collected, and patient. That silence wasn't weakness, it was power under control. It was the kind of strength that forces people to question themselves. The more they pushed with arrogance, the stronger his silence became. And when the truth finally came out, his composure made their guilt even heavier. That's the beauty of silent strength, it exposes those who underestimate it. In a world that celebrates loudness, dominance, and constant self-promotion, silence is often misunderstood. People think being quiet means being passive or powerless, but real power rarely needs to announce itself. It's steady. It's confident. It doesn't seek validation because it doesn't need it. Silent strength is the ability to stay dignified in moments of disrespect. It's the choice to remain centered when the world tries to shake you. It's the discipline to let your truth unfold naturally instead of forcing others to see it. This kind of strength comes from self-awareness. When you truly know who you are, when you've built your identity through resilience and perseverance, you don't have to prove it through confrontation. That man had already fought his battles, not the kind that are visible, but the quiet ones that happen behind closed doors, in long nights and heavy sacrifices. Every challenge he had faced built layers of strength within him, so when this moment came, he didn't need to react emotionally. His silence spoke of experience. It told a story without words, and that story demanded respect. Silent strength also carries wisdom. It understands that reacting to ignorance gives it power. When someone tries to provoke you or diminish you, your reaction becomes their validation. But when you stay calm, you deny them control. You remind them that your peace is not theirs to disturb. That's why silence can be so uncomfortable for those who thrive on conflict. They expect resistance, but when they get composure instead, it unsettles them. It reminds them that their assumptions don't define you, and their actions can't break you. Every person who has faced injustice knows how hard it is to stay silent in the face of disrespect. It's not easy to hold your tongue when you're being wronged. It takes courage to stand in calm defiance instead of shouting in anger. That's why silent strength is rare, it requires control over emotions, confidence in one's truth, and faith that the right moment will reveal everything. The man in this story embodied that perfectly. He let his silence carry the weight of his character, and when the truth came out, his calmness became the loudest statement in the room. There's a quiet dignity in choosing peace when you have every reason to fight. It's not about weakness or submission, it's about power that doesn't need validation. Silent strength doesn't beg for fairness, it creates it through presence. It's the look in the eyes that says, "You can underestimate me, but you can't define me." It's the steady breath that refuses to break even when surrounded by prejudice. And when that strength finally meets truth, the result is undeniable. It doesn't just change perceptions, it changes hearts. Silent strength speaks in a language that everyone understands but few can master. It speaks through patience, through endurance, through unwavering self-respect. It's the ability to stand in a storm and still project calm. It's the awareness that your silence holds more power than their words. And when the moment of truth arrives, that silence becomes the sound of victory, not loud, not dramatic, but complete. The reason silent strength is so powerful is because it's rooted in truth. Lies need noise to survive. Injustice thrives on chaos. But truth doesn't need to shout, it stands on its own. The man didn't have to argue about his worth or his identity. His silence said everything, that his value wasn't determined by their approval, that his dignity couldn't be touched by their ignorance, and that his calmness wasn't submission but mastery. Silent strength doesn't fight for attention, it commands it without effort. It turns the tables not through force, but through grace. In moments like that, silence becomes the bridge between who people think you are and who you truly are. It gives the world the space to witness its own mistakes. It makes arrogance look small, and truth look monumental. That's why the strongest people are often the quietest ones, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know their presence says enough. There comes a moment when the truth finally steps forward, when all the lies, assumptions, and judgments crumble under the weight of reality. It doesn't arrive with noise or chaos, but with clarity. When truth turns the tables, everything changes. The same people who were confident in their bias are suddenly uncertain, the same voices that spoke with arrogance fall silent. That's what happened when the man revealed his identity. For so long, he was seen through the lens of assumption, treated with quiet condescension and doubt, but when the truth surfaced, it reversed the entire balance of power. The people who looked down on him were suddenly looking up, realizing how wrong they had been. Truth has a way of revealing character. It doesn't just expose lies, it exposes intentions. When the man flashed his ID, the moment wasn't only about who he was, but about who they were. Their faces changed, their tone shifted, their behavior flipped in an instant. That's the mirror effect of truth. It reflects not only what's real, but also what's fake. Those who once acted superior were forced to face the smallness of their own prejudice. The truth didn't humiliate them through revenge, it humbled them through reality. There's something powerful about how truth operates. It doesn't need defense or debate, it simply exists. People can deny it, twist it, ignore it, but when it finally reveals itself, it leaves no room for excuses. That's why it's so transformative, it exposes what pride tries to hide. When those individuals realized who the man was, every assumption they made lost its power. The labels they placed on him disappeared in seconds. Suddenly, they were confronted with a truth they couldn't control, and in that confrontation, they saw their own ignorance laid bare. When truth turns the tables, it's not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, a shift in the air, a change in the way people look at one another. But its impact runs deep. It forces people to reflect on their actions, to question why they thought they had the right to judge. For that man, the power of the moment wasn't just in proving who he was, but in making them realize how little they knew. He didn't need to embarrass anyone, the truth did it for him. It worked quietly, efficiently, and completely. What makes truth so powerful is that it's You can justify your assumptions, but you can't justify your blindness when the evidence stands right in front of you. The man's ID was more than a card, it was a revelation. It forced the people around him to confront the gap between perception and reality. In their minds, they had placed him in a box that fit their comfort, but the truth shattered that box, leaving them exposed. Truth doesn't just change how people see someone, it changes how they see themselves. The moment those individuals realized their mistake, they were no longer in control. The authority they thought they had disappeared. The man they dismissed had now become the person they owed respect to. That's what truth does, it doesn't just balance the scales, it flips them. It takes those who stand on false superiority and brings them back to the ground. It reminds everyone that respect cannot be earned through ego or assumption, only through honesty and integrity. There's also a certain poetic justice in how truth reveals itself at the right time. It doesn't rush, it waits. It allows people to show who they really are before stepping forward. That patience gives truth its power. The man didn't need to correct anyone in the moment, he let them dig their own hole of judgment. And when the time came, he simply presented the reality, not with anger, but with calm certainty. That's when truth becomes its strongest. It doesn't need to prove anything, it just needs to be. In that moment, every whisper, every dismissive glance, every assumption that was made about him lost its meaning. The same people who ignored him now scrambled to make amends, to rewrite the story in their minds. But truth doesn't allow revision, it only allows realization. They had to live with what they did and how easily they had shown their prejudice. That's what truth does, it educates without speaking, corrects without shouting, and punishes without force. It makes people confront themselves. When truth turns the tables, it doesn't just bring justice, it brings perspective. It shows how fragile arrogance really is, how quickly pride can fall apart when faced with reality. It teaches that judgment without understanding is a dangerous habit, one that can turn respect into regret in a single moment. The man's composure, his silence, and his patience gave truth the perfect stage. And when it finally arrived, it spoke louder than any argument could have. The shift that happens when truth reveals itself is more than just situational, it's emotional, moral, and human. It humbles, it corrects, and it heals. It forces people to remember that status and power mean nothing if they're built on lies or ignorance. The real authority belongs to truth, and it always finds its way forward, no matter how long it takes. In that moment, the tables weren't just turned, they were reset to where they should have been all along.